I'm Alex. Welcome back to my kitchen. Imagine looking over your holiday table and seeing all of the dishes you've prepared are gluten-free and dairy-free. Well, today I'm going to show you how to make one piece of that holiday feast, the stuffing. In this video, first you'll learn how to prepare all of the ingredients for the dish. You'll learn how to chop them uniformly so that they can go into the stuffing. Second, you'll see me cook the whole dish step by step. If you want to skip the preparation of all the ingredients and you just want to see me cook the dish step by step, I'll put the timestamps in the description box below. So without further ado, today we are making holiday stuffing / dressing. It's dressing if you put it outside the bird, it's stuffing if you stuff the bird with it. This recipe can work as stuffing, but we are making it as dressing. Today, I just wanted to show you how I cut each of these ingredients, just because this recipe is really heavy on processing, so like cutting and chopping and stuff. So we're going to start with the sweet potato. The sweet potato needs to be in 1/2-inch squares. So I usually just cut off the ends of the sweet potato, and then see how it's wobbly on my cutting board? I cut it in half so that when I cut it, it doesn't wobble on my cutting board. So I'm going to go ahead and cut it into what I approximate as 1/2-inch squares. The idea is that they'll be all about the same size so that they'll cook around the same time period. I can't say that this is the best knife technique, but this rocking is sometimes helpful for really hard produce, so like squashes and potatoes like this. This is a sweet potato, this is a yam. We interchange them in the United States, but I think officially they're called yams, but I call them sweet potatoes so that people don't get confused. So I'm just going to keep chopping these into approximately 1/2-inch cubes. I'm kind of laying them down so I can see how big they are here. Yep, and then just the biggest ones, I'm gonna cut them into little smaller cubes. And they're not all gonna be the same size here, but that's okay. All right. So that's how you do the sweet potato. Okay, next thing we're gonna do is the cranberries. So cranberries are sold fresh in these kind of 12-ounce bags usually. I don't know anywhere in particular that you can get them in bulk without bags, but so if you get a bag like this, you're going to measure out, for this recipe we're going to use 1 cup, and what we're going to do is I'm going to use a little paring knife, a small knife, to just cut these in half. And this is pretty tedious. Maybe you want to get like someone to help you in the kitchen when you're doing this, and then you guys can just have a conversation while you guys are chopping. You all are chopping all the different ingredients. It's a nice bonding time. But I'm literally doing them individually because they're super bouncy, these little cranberries. So we don't want them bouncing all over while you're trying to cut several at a time. So just use it as like a meditative time where you can talk to someone else and do something that's not difficult and just cut them individually like that. Okay? So that's your cranberries. Next, we're gonna do our bacon. So I'm gonna give you a tip for bacon. This recipe calls for 4 slices of bacon, and then you're going to use the grease from the bacon, the fat, to kind of saute the rest of your food. So what I do to cook my bacon is I don't make it in a pan, I actually put it in the oven. I put it in the oven at 350 for about 25 minutes, depending on how crunchy or crispy you want it. So that's what I've done. So I have my bacon to the side here, so go ahead and put your bacon in the oven now while you're chopping everything. And then once you have your tray of bacon, you're going to take the bacon pieces off, and then you can drain the cooking fat off of the tray, the baking tray, and put it in your skillet. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is we're going to chop the celery. So it calls for 4 stalks of celery, and I'm just going to wash it. I've already washed these, and I'm going to take off the part with the leaves. I feed this to my rabbit. You can put it in your compost, or you could save it for stocks and soups. And then I cut off the bottom, like the spoon part, and I'm going to use my regular chopping knife and just use like real circular motions to just chop these pretty thinly. And you can do, if you want to, you can do all 4 slices of celery at the same time. So we're just going to chop it like that, okay? And so what you'll get is like these nice little thin slices that go well in stuffing. They'll soften up really easily and give that nice celery taste. The next thing we're going to do is mushrooms. So my mushrooms, I already bought them sliced, but the recipe calls for them to be thinly sliced. So then I'm just going to kind of roughly make them a little bit smaller. You want this to be kind of mealy. This recipe is like how stuffing is. So I'm just slicing through it, trying to keep my fingers out of the way, keep them curled, and slicing them thinly. See, I'm using this circle cut. It's not anything magical, but just making these a little bit smaller so they'll cook a little faster and be more uniform in size with the rest of the dish. Okay? And so then if you go all the way through and you see that some of it is still kind of thick, you can just go through again. So those are my mushrooms, ready for action. So this recipe calls for riced cauliflower. I've already gotten cauliflower florets, but I'm going to show you how to rice these florets just a little bit. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a food processor. I have like a little Ninja food processor. And so I'm going to take these cauliflower florets and kind of fit them in here. And then I'm going to run my food processor until they're rice texture or consistency. So here we go. I'm just going to process it a few times. Okay, so you'll see that when you just process it just a few pulses, you're going to get this mealy texture, and that's what's going to make this recipe feel like bready, or the stuffing consistency. So you can see in your food processor, you can just do that. It's just a few pulses, and you should get that rice consistency. Okay, so that's all you really need to see before the cook along. So I just wanted to show you all those steps so that when we get to the cooking part and I have all these things chopped, you're not like, oh, I don't know how to do that. I've never chopped that before. So I have my oven preheating at 350 degrees. Let's go ahead and get started. First thing we're going to do is we're going to kind of soften up these sweet potatoes. So I've cut some yams. Some of you call them sweet potatoes. They're the orange type. This is about 1 sweet potato. I've cut them into 1/2-inch cubes. And these have to cook for 30 minutes in and of themselves. So I have a cup of cranberries. They're halved. So the reason that they're halved is if you've ever cooked with fresh cranberries, they become like bombs when you heat them up, and they get full of liquid and they explode if you're eating them. So we're cutting them in half to prevent that danger. It's like molten lava inside of these cranberries. So we're mixing 1 cup fresh cranberries that are cut into halves and 1 sweet potato. And then we're going to use 3/4 of a cup of bone broth. So we made this last night, and it was a little bit, I put a little more than 3/4 of a cup bone broth because I was like, oh, I'll just finish off the bone broth. But remember that if you put too much, then your stuffing will be a little bit wetter. So I'd say go with 3/4 of a cup. Don't really add much more than that because you want it to be able to kind of steam the food, but you don't want it to be mushy at the end of your creation. So we're going to add 3/4 of a cup of this bone broth in with my cranberries and my yams. And I'm using basically like a pasture-raised organic bone broth. You want to buy, if you're buying bone broth, you want to buy the highest quality bone broth you can, because a lot of times the toxins are concentrated inside the bones and you don't want to release those if you buy low quality stock or broth. So we've got this going, and we are going to bake this for 15 minutes and then stir it and then bake it for another 15 minutes. So it's going into my oven. My oven is at 350 degrees. So we're gonna set a timer here for 15 minutes, and when this tings, we're gonna stir it, okay? Next, we are going to move on to the bacon. If you want to make this recipe vegan, which is pretty easy to do, there's not a lot of meat products, it's just the bacon, go ahead and use a solid cooking fat. I would recommend coconut oil if you're trying to make this vegan. If not, what you're gonna do is you're gonna cook 4 pieces of bacon. You can either cook them in the pan, but I hate cooking them in the pan, so I actually cooked them in the oven, and then I drained the oil, and I'm gonna use this oil in, well, it's a solid cooking fat, and I'm gonna use that fat in my pan to cook the rest of my ingredients. And that's gonna give it, for those of you who aren't vegetarian, that's gonna give it a nice savory flavor. And this bacon is also pasture raised. So I know I talk about this pretty much every video, but you want to buy the highest quality ingredients you can, especially if you're going to be using the fat of the animal. So if you can't afford pasture raised bacon, I would skip using the fat and I would just use the coconut oil, because the fat is actually where a lot of toxins are stored inside our bodies and inside the animals that we eat. So this is where it actually does matter the way that the animals are treated and fed and cared for, because it affects the quality of not only the meat but the oil as well. So I've got the oil in the pan, there's some bacon that made it in there, and we are going to add onion and celery. So it's gonna be half an onion, which I already chopped. I didn't feel the need to explain how to chop an onion, but if you need help chopping an onion, let me know and I'll make a little tutorial about it. But I'm sure that you can find one if you're in a pinch on YouTube. But if you want one from me, let me know and I'll make an onion chopping tutorial. Okay, so we are doing half an onion. I know that's really vague. The thing about this recipe that is great is that stuffing is not an exact science, and you can literally just use up your ingredients. So I know I said, okay, half an onion, and you're like, okay, well, how big is my onion? Whatever onion you have, just cut half of it. If it's a small onion, use the whole onion. If it's a huge onion, maybe use a little less than half. But you can't mess up by putting too much or too little, except for your own taste. And hopefully this onion's gonna get really soft and caramelized, so you won't regret putting too much in it. So I put the half of an onion, like I said. I ended up putting, I'd say about a cup of onions. And then you're gonna put 4 stalks celery, and we sliced it really thin. So we've got the onion and the celery going here, but this is gonna make a nice base for your stuffing. And I have it on medium heat, just in case you're wondering about that. And then the next thing we're going to do is mince our garlic and our oh no, my rosemary, I forgot to get it. I'm going to go get the rosemary. I will be back. I am back with muddy paws and fresh rosemary. This is what it looks like in case you're wondering. It has been washed because it is raining outside. So we're gonna go ahead and push this to the side, and I'm gonna show you how to prepare this rosemary. So the rosemary is kind of like a tougher herb, and you can strip it by just pulling the opposite way from which the leaves grow, and then you'll get like an empty branch, and all the little rosemary pieces will fall right off. And the thing about rosemary is it's got a really strong flavor, and it's concentrated in the oils of the rosemary. But rosemary isn't one of those herbs that you can really just put straight into your mouth. It's a more woody herb. So we're going to be mincing about 2 tablespoons of rosemary. We're going to have all of the holiday flavors in here. Let me stir this up a little bit. Okay, so I'm going to do this rosemary with like a pivot chop. So I'm just putting my hand on one end of the knife, and then I'm kind of pivoting it around. I'm keeping my fingers far away from the blade, and I am just chopping it until the rosemary leaves are in tiny pieces. So I'm not going to measure because this is as much rosemary as I'm going to put no matter what. If you have a choice the recipe calls for about 2 tablespoons rosemary. You won't make a mistake if you put a little more or a little less. I was supposed to time this, but that's all right. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to chop this garlic. I use this little contraption to chop my garlic, or to mince my garlic. You put the garlic in the hole and then you press it like that. I think it's called a garlic press. They're really easy to find. And some people hate cleaning them. You can easily mince the garlic in the same way that I just minced the rosemary with the pivot cut. But I'm gonna use my garlic press. For some reason, I just prefer using that. And if this is the first video you're watching and you've never done garlic before, I'm going to go ahead and show you the easy way to get the skins off of the garlic. So you're going to just, you're going to chop off a little bit from here and a little bit from both ends. And then you're going to smash it with the flat part of your knife. So you're going to hold it like this and smash it. And you can see the skins come off nice and easily from that garlic once you've smashed it. And then you can just put it straight into your garlic press or cut it with your knife, whatever you end up deciding that you're going to do with your garlic. So as soon as we're done chopping this garlic, we're going to go ahead and put both the garlic and the rosemary into our dish here, our pan. So you'll see that the celery and the onions are starting to brown, and that's what you want. You want them brown, but you don't want them burnt. So that takes so we got 3 cloves of garlic, and then my rosemary. My minced rosemary, 2 tablespoons. And once you start cooking up that rosemary, it'll kind of soften it and the oils will be released and you'll get that aromatic flavor of the rosemary right away. As soon as I put it in the pan, it just went, this breeze of rosemary wafted over me. So we're going to cook that for 2 more minutes so that garlic and that rosemary can get warmed up. I'm such a messy cook. I hope that's encouraging. You don't have to be clean to be a good cook and make messes all the time. Okay, we're going to let that kind of sit a little bit here. I'm going to wipe this down. So a good time to clean your workstation is like this in between jobs when you have like a minute or 2 of downtime. The next thing we are going to do is we're going to chop a green apple. These are called Granny Smith. The cool thing is that apples and cranberries are all in season right now. It's really good idea to eat with the seasons because your food, if you're eating with the seasons, is coming from closer to home. And the closer to home it is to you, the more local it is, the more nutrients it's going to be allowed to have, because it's when we import these foods from long distances is when farmers have to prioritize the bumping and bruising of the vegetable over the nutrient content. So what we find is that when things are in season and you eat locally and you eat things that are in season, the nutrient value of your foods is higher. So right now, apples and cranberries are in season. That's why so many of these fall foods that we love feature these ingredients. All right. So here this is ready. We're just going to let that sit in the pan for a minute while we finish these apples. So what I was doing is I was taking out the core. So I took out the seeds, I took out the core, and now we're going to cut them in 1/2-inch slices. I am using my paring knife because this is like a weird shape, but you want them to be in the same kind of general shape and size as the potatoes that you just cut. So 1/2 inch so that they'll cook kind of at the same rate. So I'm not spending too much time agonizing over it. I'm just kind of eyeballing it. All right, we got a lot to do. That means it's time to stir that baby in the oven. So I've cubed that apple. We're going to stir what we've got in here in the oven. Stirred that so it cooked evenly. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to remove this mixture and set it aside. This girl won't let me have my 15 minutes of fame without butting in. Okay, so I'm just taking this out of the bowl and putting it to the side. Okay, so we've taken out this mixture, we're putting it to the side, and we are going to add 1 tablespoon of coconut oil into our pan. And then we are going to add the mushrooms to the pan. And we're going to turn the pan on. We're going to cook those mushrooms. So those mushrooms are going to cook for about 2 minutes. We're going to stir them so they get coated in this oil. But you'll notice that after about 2 minutes, the mushrooms will release their water. And it's called sweating. And the mushrooms will look like they're sweating, basically. So they'll release their water, and then they'll kind of turn darker. So you'll see how I just kind of chopped those up so that they'd be small and the same size as like all the other ingredients. So you want like a consistent size that will make the dish feel kind of like uniform. So while those are cooking, we are going to talk about the cauliflower rice. So what I did was I bought a bag of cauliflower florets and I processed them in my food processor until they were the consistency of rice. So you'll see here that they're not very big, and it only took a few pulses to get that rice-like consistency from my cauliflower. And because this recipe is dairy-free and gluten-free, meaning there's no bread, the cauliflower is there to give it the consistency, that bready consistency. It's not going to be an exact dupe, obviously, but the cool thing is that you'll get another serving of vegetables. That'll be good. So what we're doing is we're cooking these mushrooms. I have them again over medium heat, and I'm stirring them around. Okay, that was 2 minutes. So after 2 minutes, you're going to add 1 head of cauliflower. So I didn't buy exactly 1 cauliflower and then measure it, but what I did buy was I bought a 12-ounce bag of cauliflower. In my last video, we made mashed cauliflower, and from my little experiment, it was like n equals 1. It was only 1 cauliflower, but we had about 1 pound of cauliflower florets in 1 head of cauliflower. So if you want to be exact, this is a little bit less than 1 head of cauliflower, but then also you don't have to like cut it apart as much, but you can easily just cut the florets off of the cauliflower and then make it in your food processor. If you don't have a food processor, you can always, a lot of stores already sell riced cauliflower, so you can look for that in your vegetable section. You can also try in your blender. I know it won't work exactly like a food processor, but if you do small batches, you should be able to get your cauliflower into this rice consistency. Okay, so we're going to add the cauliflower rice and stir it up. We're basically just waiting for this cauliflower to cook. I'm going to put it on 5 minutes, and we're going to just incorporate those mushrooms into that cauliflower and kind of just hang out with it for 5 minutes. While we're doing that, I'm going to measure out my cinnamon. So I've got my cinnamon ready for action. I've got my salt ready for action. We're going to add our salt and our cinnamon. So the next step after this, once the 5 minutes are through, is we are going to add our apples, our celery, onion, garlic mixture, and our cauliflower mushroom mixture in with what is in the oven. So we're almost done here. And then we're gonna top it with the bacon pieces. So I'm gonna go ahead and chop my bacon into smaller pieces here. So my bacon's ready to be added. Again, remember, if you want to make it vegan, you don't have to add bacon. I would just, instead of using the bacon fat, I would use 1 or 2 tablespoons of coconut oil. Sorry, my dog has found a friend and they are communicating through the walls. So we're nearing the end of this recipe. This is going to be the most boring part, just waiting for this to finish cooking. So basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you on camera when I combine everything, and then I'll put it in the oven, but we're going to put it in the oven for 10 minutes after it's all the ingredients are combined. And those will be the final 10 minutes, and then I show you the final product so you'll be able to see how it turns out. I don't really have 10 minutes of talking for you while we do the last push. While we're waiting, you can meet my dog. Come here. Sit, girl. Up. Say hello. Say hi. Hi. Hi, everyone. Hi, YouTube. Come here. One more time. Come here. Dog intermission. My poorly trained animal. Be sure to stir this so that the granules that are on the hot part of the pan don't get burned. So if you do end up making this, make sure you take a picture, put it on my feed, put it on your feed, tag me, put it in your stories, tag me, and I'll definitely give you a shout out. So, all right, that was my timer. I'm going to show you how to combine all of these. So, depending on the size of your pan, so you can see I use a toaster oven, so that's going to affect what size pan I can use. So this is why my pan is only about this big, but if you have a bigger pan, you probably be able to fit everything in it. I'm just going to fill it, and then once it's full, I'm going to stop. I'm not going to overfill it because it won't cook right. But if you can, find a wider pan. So we're going to add the cauliflower mixture, the celery onion mixture. We are going to add a 1/4 teaspoon of cinnamon. Sorry, I burned myself right there. I already added salt. I just added salt just now. We're going to add the apple. Ooh, those are big pieces. We're going to stir it so that everything is evenly spread out here. Ooh, this apple piece is a little too big for me. I'm going to cut it a little smaller. And with that, it's going to go back in the oven for the last 10 minutes. And I'm also going to top it with the little bacon bits as well. And it'll go back in the oven for 10 minutes, and it will be through. So I hope that encourages you to make a stuffing that's different than you usually make, but is definitely lower in the amount of inflammatory ingredients, because a lot of times that dairy and that gluten are the ones that really get us congested, they give us brain fog, our bodies have a harder time with them, and that's why so many people suggest that you eliminate gluten. And I know a lot of times it's really hard in the holidays to even conceive of eliminating those ingredients from your holiday feast, because you've never made them that way and you don't really have any experience. You've never seen anyone make them that way. So I hope this gives you kind of like a suggestion of that it's not difficult, it just requires some chopping, but so does regular stuffing, so does regular dressing. Like, you're going to have to chop anyway, so why not use ingredients that are more nutritious, more nutrient dense, and less inflammatory for you. So we're going to take this and put it back into the oven for 10 minutes, and then we'll be done. If you are using this to stuff a bird, do not put it back in the oven like this for 10 minutes. Go ahead and instead of putting it in the oven, put it in the bird. Does that make sense? So if you're really using it as stuffing, that now would be the time, after you've assembled it like that, to put it inside of the bird. Okay? Hi friends. Okay, so I wanted to show you how the stuffing turned out because I didn't show you on video because it was going to be another 10 minutes of me babbling about who knows what. But anyway, here's how this turned out. The last 10 minutes. So you can see it's got the consistency of stuffing, it's the texture of stuffing, and I can tell you that it's delicious because I had some for lunch today and it's good. It's really good. So yeah, I would consider it a success if you have. Thanks so much for watching this video. Don't forget to subscribe if you want to see more ways to make your holiday feasts gluten-free and dairy-free. And if you want to learn a little bit more about my philosophy behind food, I'll also link a playlist in the description box below. I cook live on Instagram. You'll find the link to my Instagram in the description box below. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you next time.